URL and the passwords because these ones are
Great.
harder for me to read, which is lots of.
Sure. Well, actually, I can see that we're starting the streaming right now. So there's just a few minutes left. Yeah, sure. I'll be honored to read that. I'll try my best. So we'll just wait a few more minutes.
So what are we already streamed? So yeah.
Yes, we are.
You will introduce yourself and me.
Sorry. Yes. Well, I mean, I was thinking I have a little text about you, but you're also welcome to introduce yourself, actually, because migration is about telling your story in your own way. So I figured actually you should be the one introducing yourself.
Yeah, you can introduce it, and if needed, I'll add one or two things. What I saw what you wrote, so I think you can do it. Wait a second, I'll clean my nose for 1 moment.
It's okay. Don't forget, we're already live.
All right.
Great. We'll give it 2 more minutes.
Is it the same link we published on the Facebook event?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yeah, we're going live in a minute now. I can see there are 13 people waiting already.
You speak Hebrew also, Maya?
I do. I do. I studied it a bit on the side. I used to be better, but then I started learning Arabic a few years ago. It kind of overtook my Hebrew, and I got very confused studying both at the same time.
Really?
So so I can get by, but it's a lot harder for me to speak.
Wow.
Okay, great. We are actually online. My team tells me. So welcome to all of you in front of your screens watching our live stream with the next migration event. Welcome to Matti. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've really been looking forward to this event for you for many months now. It's my pleasure to host this reading for you today. My name is Maya. And I'm here representing Mygration. For those of you who don't know, we're an interdisciplinary storytelling initiative who seeks to empower migrant and people with migrant backgrounds to tell their stories in their own way. And when we were putting together the program, we knew that we really wanted to include your work. We were really moved by your poetry. And so we're very happy. We first wanted to have this festival in March. Then, of course, COVID happened. So now we're really happy to have you, Matti, here on this online series. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm happy that finally we are doing it.
Same, same. So a couple of words about what we're doing today. After a few words of introduction, we will do, you will read the poems of your anthology, Baghdad, Haifa, Berlin. It will be in Hebrew and German, as the book is also in Hebrew and German, and we will get to talk about languages as well. And afterwards, we will have a Q&A, or it will accompany the reading. So this will be about an hour. If people want to ask questions on the YouTube link, you're very welcome to do so, and I will try to include them. So first of all, let me introduce Matti to you in a couple of words. Matti is a writer, poet, activist, author, and editor who was born in Haifa, Israel, but has been living in Berlin since 2013. He has been publishing widely on Mizrahi and Ashkenazi Jews, Israelis and Palestinian issues, Middle Eastern refugees, and other social and political topics in Israel and in Europe. Over the last 10 years, he's been part of the ongoing activism to raise the voice, rights, and heritage to the Mizrahi people, Arab-born Jews in Israel and all over the world. And he's been member of many initiatives, such as the Mizrahi Democratic Rainbow, and he was also one of the founders of guerrilla culture, movement in Israel that connected social change advocacy with poetic creativity. In Berlin, you might know him from the Poetic Hafla, a group that has created literature, music, and art performance events. And he also published this anthology, Baghdad, Haifa, Berlin, which we're very happy to share with you today. Is there anything you would like to add, Matti, on this account?
Yeah, I'm also only one thing, because we have an event next month, so a big symposium. Also founded together with the writer Ila Amit Abbas, a group called Anu Nahna, Jews and Arabs Writing in Berlin, which deals with the Middle Eastern culture of Berlin and all the interchange between them. And yeah, we have a big symposium, so look for us, and we can share the link later in the site.
Great. You can also find Matti and Mygration on your social media accounts of choice, and we can get back to that in the end. So I would say, to start off, before I will share the screen so we can all read along with the poems. But before that, I wanted to ask you whether you can say a few words about how this book was created, how it came together, and why you decided to call it Baghdad, Haifa, Berlin. What is the journey you're taking us on?
Okay, I'm just doing one pause to wipe my nose.
Sure, it is flu time.
Sorry, I'm here. Why did I call the book Haifa, Baghdad, Berlin, Baghdad, Haifa, Berlin? That's the question. My mother was born in Baghdad. I come from a family of the Baghdadian Jews, of the Iraqi Jews, which they say that goes back to the fall of the Second Temple, that the exiled Jews of Zion. When I came to Berlin and I immigrated to Berlin, and there was an offer to publish my first collection of poems, a bilingual collection. So my editor, Mr. Rainer Winkel Maria, he offered the name, but I agreed to that because it's like three cities that I'm taking in my way, the city that I never been and I cannot go because I'm an Israeli and I cannot fly to Baghdad, and I long to go there. And Haifa, the place where I was born, and it's part of my identity. I cannot reject it or deny it in any way. And Berlin, which is a place where I became the base of my writing and my livelihood.
So following this journey in this reading, I wanted to start with one poem. I'm just going to share my screen. Just a second. Okay. Just bring it up. Okay, great. So you can see my screen, right?
Yeah. Can you make it a bit bigger? The percentage?
Yes, I will make it bigger for
great.
the reading. Okay, and I'll close this. This will be nicer. Okay, great.
Yeah, okay. So, shall I start?
Yes, please do. And
באמת, בבר מצווה פחדתי כל כך ממאבטחי כור ההיתוך, שנתתי להם בעסקה ללא טיעון את שרשרת זהב גאוותי. היום, אני מלקט את חרוזי ההיסטוריה של אבותיי, רחוק מחנויות התכשיטים המקומיות, ואוסף את אבני החן של הזיכרון, שצללו לאיבוד באוקיינוס הבושה. Wirklich. Bei der Bar Mitzwa hätte ich solche Angst vor den Ottern der Schmelzziegels, dass ich ihnen widerspruchlos meinen ganzen Stolz abtrat, meine Goldkette. Heute verknüpfe ich in Versen meiner Vatergeschichte, fernab eisiger Schmuckladen, sammle Edelsteine der Erinnerung, die verloren gingen im Ozean der Scham.
So I guess my first question is, why did you decide to include this poem in this book? Why does our journey start here?
Well, I grew up in Israel, where I had never learned about Baghdad in all 12 years of my upbringing. Not only the content was missing, but also all the teachers were kind of European Jews, Ashkenazi. So the system was kind of giving me mirror of without representing my culture in the knowledge, and created kind of a power mechanism of Europe-centric kind of structure. And so when I woke up and I understood that I don't know nothing about myself and where I came from and the place where my mother came from and also my father came from, and I understood the inferiority complex that was bringing me on my knees, and I stood with pride, and I looked to bring back the beautiful jewels of the memory of my community. And it's a task that never stops. It's not like one moment. And so it was a very important moment to show to the Berlin scene and the Germans and European that that this is a place where my poetry started to talk from a place of a loss and a place to regain my pride in myself and my community, and so I can be part of society again.
So what role did poetry play for you in that, and in discovering and shaping Mizrahi poetry as a genre, which from what I understand is not something that was really a genre beforehand?
No, it wasn't recognized. You know, when they did a few years ago, they did a government committee to choose which pictures to put on the new the money, the cash, the Israeli shekels, and they choose only Ashkenazi poets. And when they were asked why there was no Mizrahi poet or Palestinian, they said there's no Mizrahi culture that equals the European culture. And but then again, there is already books about it, and there's a big it's been now learned in the universities. And but when I grew up, it was non-existent. Poetry was a place that gives you a weapon and gives you also because the big publishers forgot about poetry. But poetry is something. It's a strong tool. It's a strong tool of recreating the self. I won a prize for this book. And when I came to look for publishers, nobody wants to publish it. So I took the prize and I published this in a little publisher. And it became like there's a big influence. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but there was a big influence from these poems about the Mizrahi poetry. And the first methodology book that was written about Mizrahi poetry took the line from my the last line of my first poem in this book. So it's kind of I believed in myself, although the system didn't believe in me. But in the end, I found my community and my recognition. So.
Right, and I guess this also very much talks or connects to your activism that I mentioned a bit in your biography. What does it mean for you to be also, I guess, an activist poet in that sense? Is that something you would use to describe yourself?
Yeah, it changed drastically from the moment I left Israel, because in Israel I was part of the system. So when I wrote these poems, I was thinking about talking to the government. When I sit here, my activism changed towards to whom I want to speak. So, for instance, one of my things that I'm active here with connecting the Middle Eastern culture in Berlin and bringing Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians and the Middle Eastern together, and to look for our mutual vision, because it's more important to me than now to talk with the German government in that sense, because I cannot vote here, and so there's a change in an activism when you are citizen of a place and when you are a resident. Or I'm not even a resident of Berlin. I mean, I have an Anmeldung, but I don't vote here even. So I'm kind of still Auslander, which means a man without outside of the land.
Right.
So it changed, it's not the same. My activism became more cultural and less political in the immediate sense of it. But sometimes when I read the scholars, what they read, I see that I didn't change. I'm still doing things that influence the poets to politicize their context, to understand the political. For instance, now my latest booklet that I published in Aphorisma Verlag, there is one poem about the new birth of the Hebrew Center in Berlin, the literary Hebrew Center, and I'm asking the big question: would you take the role of also bringing the message of peace with Palestinians here, because we are free here from the oppression of the political oppression in Israel? Because I still want this new literary center to be to strive for a change here also. So yeah, I'm still in that sense a believer. My activism comes from a belief, from a vision that I see Palestinians and Israeli living together in peace, justice, and equality. And I'm not fearing if there will be a prime minister that is Palestinian, and I think we can learn each other poetry. But in Israel, they think about me as a guy from a different time, I guess.
And from the community here?
Well, I also always have opposition, so I also love to listen to the opposition. But I think the the Israeli community, for instance, here is it's both right wing and there's also right wing here and left wing, and also the left wing is there's the Zionist left and the radical left. So I'm open to hear the voices. There's voices who are still suspicious, and there's voices who are empowered and inspired. But for me, the most important thing is, for instance, to have a talk with my Palestinian friends and to hear their voice about it. So I cannot, for instance, I always think about them in this situation when I, even now, when we talk now, I don't want to make a Jewish identity without thinking about their ongoing oppression. So yeah, very important to me. But still, I don't forget where I come from. So I still want to hear my community also and their fears and their suspicions, and it's all going inside of my poetry in the end. Sometimes I just fly with the dreams, you know.
Right.
Sorry, I just clean my nose again. I think another one.
I mean, we included a poem at the end where I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Israel, the country where you were born, and we jumped ahead a little bit. But in order to follow also a little bit the idea from Baghdad to Haifa to Berlin, I wanted to take the next step and ask you to read out the Mondlichtgeschichte, and to come back a little bit to you know, your family's history also that you spoke about a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Before I read it, in the German version, it's Umas in the end. There is a slight, there is a mistake, but it's always happening in books that one moment there is a mistake. So in the next edition, we'll fix it. It's called Moonlichtgeschichte, and outside I can see the exact moon that I talked about. So it's, if you look outside, you can see the moon that I imagined in this in this poem. Okay.
All right.
סיפור אור ירח. 70 מינים של תמרים היו בבגדד, סיפרה לי סבתי והוסיפה. חבל שעזבנו, שם לא היו תרופות באוכל, שם לא היו חממה, שם לא היינו אוכלים פרה, והקובות היו מלאות בבשר כבש. וגם אם דרכי לבגדד נהרסה, ולמרות שאינני דובר את השפה, עכשיו אני יודע שחיי הם חתיכת חשיכה של היסטוריה, התלויה על וו סיפור אור ירח של סבתי. Mundlich-Geschichte. Witzig Datensorten gab es in Bagdad, erzählte mir meine Oma und fügte hinzu. Schade, dass wir von dort weggegangen sind. Dort gab man keine Medizin ins Essen. Dort gab es keine Gewächse außer. Dort wurden wir kein Rind essen. Die Fleischbällchen, die wären von Schaf. Ist auch mein Weg nach Bagdad zerstört, kann ich auch die Sprache nicht sprechen, weiß ich jetzt zumindest, dass mein Leben ein ziemlich dunkles Stück Geschichte ist. Mit einem Haken an dem hängt meine Omas Mundlich-Geschichte.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this a conversation you actually would have or used to have with your grandparents frequently?
Yeah, it took me time to politicize and understand the social structure of it. And now it's, so when I wrote it, it was important to me to bring her voice inside. So now she's not with us. Actually, she died not from corona, but she died from age. And I couldn't go to a grave because of corona and what's happening in Israel right now and in Germany. And, yeah, it's also, I learned more, not only by the time that I wrote it, but also when I became an immigrant myself. Sorry, just lost time. Okay. Yeah, so it's it's a poem that like try to bring light in this darkness when you understand that you're like a robot. Somebody puts another program inside of you. But it's not only my story, it's a story of all the people who learned in a Eurocentric system or in a system that didn't recognize their identity. And it happens in the modern time. And I think in our time, we are more learning to live with the loss than to look for to fix it. I think in the modern time, they thought that you can fix it. And in our times, we learn to accept the loss. And so this is, I think, although I learned a lot about Iraq, for the moment I understood that it's missing. So I wrote a lot and I performed. I just published my articles book in Israel. So a lot of the articles it's about Baghdadian poets, especially women one, like Amira S and others. So, but still, it's a loss because I cannot speak my mother's tongue, which is Iraqi.
I was just about to ask your and your family's relationship with the language. And you're saying in the poem that you don't speak the language also. How much did you grow up with it, or was it something, because of course, the relationship Israeli mainstream society with the Arabic languages is very complex, and in many ways a difficult one. So
yeah, there's no policeman to tell you not to speak Iraqi, but the policing of this of the subject of the Zionism was in an idea that also was inflicted on the Yiddish on the Yiddish speakers, not only the Arab Jews or the Hungarian Jews or the Romanian Jews, because at the start of the 50s and 40s, they were all spoke three languages as the European Jews do. You even as a Berliner, you speak also Arabic and Hebrew and English. And when I immigrated, I went in Israel, I spoke only Hebrew and maybe a little bit of English. But when I immigrated, now we speak German and English and Hebrew and the German Berliner accent of the Israeli Berliners. So I went back to the situation of the Jews that speak three languages as it was before Israel, because Israel became mono-linguistic place. And the people accepted it because they wanted to be part of a society. And so it's still sad to me to talk about it, but my mom, she accepted the idea that she speaks with my grandmother, with her mother, Iraqi, but not with us. And now one of the reasons that I speak with my daughter only Hebrew and she speaks German with her mother, it's to give her what I didn't got. But funny enough, when I read it in in Deutsch today with my partner and like try to arrange the words right, the words that I say here, which is kann ich auch die Sprache nicht sprechen, or in Hebrew it's למרות שאינני דובר את השפה, it still also resembles my situation, which I don't speak German. And this is part of my poetic idea today when I speak a lot about being an immigrant. And I understand that I grew up in an immigrant society, and the immigrant is it's one on one hand you can in a liberal society can you can say okay it's his decision to teach his children how to take the Hebrew or not. I have a Kurdish friend who didn't taught Kurdish his daughter, but on the other hand it's also there's also social structure of society, you understand, so that influences the subject. So it's not only liberal idea of the subject, the individual, but also a mass propaganda kind of situation in Israel, the דבר עברית or speak only Hebrew or עברית לעברי, Hebrew for the Hebrew, it's still an idea that in a way there's like one land of Jews for one people, one Sprache, one folk, all this German nationalism that went into the Zionism, that you can also hear it today in the AfD or other people who think that people who doesn't speak full language are not part of the German culture. So it's something that influenced that and made me a lot of pain. And I try to rearrange my soul through writing this poem. And funny enough, it's also influenced other poets. And so Eli Eliyahu, one of the now known poets in Israel in my generation, There was a time when he asked about a beautiful poem that he wrote about his father that used to go down in the parking lot underneath the house and put Arabic music. He said because he said he was in an event that I and Amira S and Almog Me'ar read about Baghdad, and he came home and he didn't have a poem about Baghdad, so he wrote it about his father. So it's kind of you give also the torch of fire to others, and they give it to the new generations.
Well, actually, you're segueing perfectly into the poem Ich bin Judendichter, which is why I would really like to skip ahead to that one, because the question of languages is central, of course, in that one. So maybe if you want to read it first again, and then we can talk about it a bit more.
So, guys, I will read it also in German, but it's written in German and Hebrew. So when I read it in Hebrew, they always ask for translation because it's mostly in German, but it's written in Hebrew. So the changes between the two versions will be minor in the German version, but I read both of them. It was written as I heard the poem. There's no editing to the German. It was influenced by broken German of Tomer Gardier. Ich bin Judendichter. Ich schreibe Hebräisch. Ich כותב עברית. Du fragst, warum schreibe ich Hebräisch in Berlin? Voila, לא יודע. Ich kann nicht schreiben gut Englisch oder natürlich kein gut Deutschen. ואני גר בך. Und was du denke, wo ist dein Herz mit meinen Worten? Wo ist dein Herz mit meinen Worten? ואיפה אתה גר עכשיו בין המילים האלו? Ich bin ein Lachmann, ich bin schlecht Juden, Immigrant von Irak, ich bin Juden und ich bin Arabisch. Und warum kein viele Hebräisch in deiner Stadt, aber so viele andere Immigranten? Ich weiß. Und jetzt jeden Tag, ich frage das immer Fragen. Und du sagst, bitte, wir können tanzen und nicht vergessen. אבל קשה לרקוד שיש בתוך הבטן ספר תורה בוער, ולא הוא קל לי. Ich bin Judendichter, ich schreibe Hebräisch, ein Mann schreibt Ivrit. Du fragst, warum schreibe ich Hebräisch in Berlin? Voila, keine Ahnung. Ich kann nicht schreiben gut Englisch oder natürlich kein gut Deutschen. Und ich bin Fremde in dir. Und ich bin Fremde in dir. Und was du denke? Wo ist dein Herz mit meinen Worten? Und wo wohnst du nun zwischen diesen Worten? Ich bin ein Lachmann, ich bin ein Schlechtjuden, Immigrant von Irak. Ich bin Juden und ich bin Arabisch. Und warum kein viele Hebräisch in deiner Stadt? Aber so viele andere Immigranten. Ich weiß. Und jetzt, jeden Tag, ich frage das immer Fragen. Und du sagst, bitte, wir können tanzen. Und nicht vergessen. Aber wie soll ich tanzen, wenn in meinem Bauch eine Tora-Rolle lodert? Can you put it up a little bit? Okay. Die sich mir nicht verbrannt. Okay, aber wie soll ich tanzen, wenn ich in meinem Bauch eine Tora-Rolle lodert, die sich mir nicht verbrennt?
So, what does it mean to be a Judendichter? To be a bad Jew? To be, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you're also opening up this good immigrant, bad immigrant. At least that's how I'm reading it here. This kind of dichotomy that we hear a lot in the media. Who is the good one? Who's the bad one? So what does it mean to be a Judendichter in Berlin?
So let me ask you, Maya, for instance, when you read it in Deutsch or in Hebrew? Which version did you read?
I first read it in Deutsch, then I went over to the Hebrew, and then I thought, is this Yiddish over there, or is it kind of a mixture?
Yeah, you're right. It's the shoulder of the Yiddish, because Yiddish was written in Hebrew, so it was brought. So you read it first in German, and then when you read it in German, how did you felt like? Because it's kind of a broken German. It's a lot of mistakes, rambling, right? Or you can listen just as a talk,
I read it out loud because I think that helps, because I think if you read it loud, you can actually really understand it.
Yeah, so to your question, I there's always like something on you, you know, either the people projecting because I don't hide at the time Juden, so I was stunned to hear that it still occurs in Berlin, like in Germany, that some people kids in school say, you've been Juden, and it's kind of also derogatory. I guess you sometimes one time they called me from Galet Tzahal, the radio of the army, which is a popular radio in Israel. And they asked me how do I feel in the International Day of the Holocaust Memorial, the International Day of, you understand me. And I told them that there isn't one day that I mourn. When you walk here, you feel like that the question is all the time coming from down to you, because there were so many people who wanted to do what you did, and their life were abruptly stopped. Of course, not only Jews, also other homosexual, gay, and Roma people, and until today, we know that it's not only a Jewish story. But as a Jew, it's a question that comes to me again and again. I don't know, this poem, it's the first time I heard about the good immigrant, bad immigrant, because it's a voice that was, when I wrote it, it's kind of an inside voice. I didn't, on the one hand, it sounds like I'm talking with Germans, but it's a very private poem, and because even when he asks the questions, he knows the answers, so it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of, it's a sensibility of responsibility and accountability, and I tried to, in the start it was a very light poem, and then it became very hard. There was an anthology, We Can Tanzen and Ich Vergessen, that Norbert Krohn and Amichai Shalev did of Israeli and German writers, you know. So I answered them in the end that it's hard to dance. Although, yeah, I'm living here, so also sometimes I'm dance, but I had the urge to write a poem as I talk, you know, to leave the idea of only Hebrew, or in the poetic Hafla, I always did it, but I never wrote it down and published it. So it's the first time that I allowed myself to, this is what it means to be a Yuden, because it's between languages, you know, this is one of the things. It's about also the memory of the Torah. It's about also being Middle Eastern, if you are Ashkenazi, so Middle Eastern. If you are Arab Jew, so you're Jewish and Arab. It's this walla lo yodea, it's the Hebrew coming inside, and the English and the Arabic. Walla, it's also Turkish used walla. So it's kind of, it's everything together. And it always makes me sad, always makes me cry when I read the last verses of the poem. It's never stopped making me sad. And it's kind of the first poem that I wrote about the Holocaust in this sense. When I have a poem in Israel that I wrote, don't talk about the Holocaust when you oppressing the Palestinians, talk about the Holocaust when you have nuclear weapons, and it's continuing like that. And because in Israel, as Mizrahi, you became a lot of time relative to, you said, you talk about your hardship, but you never talk about others, and it's become like a fight between cultures. But when I came here, I could connect to the Holocaust from outside of the national story, which freed me a lot.
I actually really wanted to ask you how your, I guess, relationship to this topic, in particular to the Holocaust, but also between Holocaust and Jewish identity, how your view on that changed coming to Germany. Also, especially if you're saying you're coming from a family where that's actually not part of the family story, but of course you grew in a national culture where it's very much a reference point. So yeah, how did your view on Jewish identities maybe also change in Berlin? Did it change? Was there something that surprised you in the way it's being negotiated here also maybe?
Well, a lot of questions. We did like 10 questions now.
That's why I told you I overprepared
to answer it. So first of all, it's very liminal to be, meeting the German culture. So the German culture, it's not one thing. So there is, for instance, the beautiful change of the Germans when I meet Benedict Wells, which is the grandson of his grandfather was the head of the Hitler Jugend, and is a friend of mine, and he's an amazing person, and a lot of other friends who change, and there's no resemblance between their grandfathers or grandmothers and themselves. And also, all the time, and I talk about their responsibility, also talk about my responsibility of my father that was wars against the Palestinians or others, and there's also I change in front of my elders, and on the other end there is the bad. I immigrated the wrong place because there's the uprising of the extreme far right. When I came here, there was just NPD, and now that Pegida, and then the AfD was so strong. It's so strong, and so it's also I see the new conservative. The Jewish identity is, and this is, I had a big theory about it, and I write about it a lot, also in the Kleine text in Aphorisma and in Yalta magazine, in the few things that I published lately. And when you come here by a must, your identity change, because you cannot, the national forces doesn't work on you anymore. They don't work on you. You have to open Ynet and the Israeli media, or I don't know, go to embassies, events. I don't know. You have to, if you want to be national, you have to work on it. Because here you're in a post-national situation, even if you are a far-right person that hates all the others. And so I think every Israeli and every, so you have a question about what you connect. So I have friends of mine who I don't know, connect through football to Israel, but doesn't circumcise their kids and rejected Jewishness. I connected well to the Frankel-Ufer synagogue and their community, and I go to their events, and I like what I see there. And Jewishness is very important to me, as well as Hebrew. That's why, in a way, I don't really fully connect to the German culture in the way of mastering the German and reading German books every day, because I'm still really try to be updated with Hebrew. Yeah, is it answering your question? Or do you? I think I answered 5 of them.
It was a lot of questions, but also we've picked another poem, which I think is maybe a slightly different take at all the questions I was just asking you. And Jüdische Araber in Berlin, Yehudi Aravit Berlin. Maybe we can continue the conversation on this poem also.
Yeah, great. But I really appreciate your question. I'm not in any turn ridiculous there. It's for me, when I read them alone before even you send it, I really, it's always flattering and makes you feel that somebody really, I think poetry is a very intimate place, and so you can really enter the soul of somebody, and your questions show that I really like them. So don't be afraid to ask more and more. Yehudi Aravi Berlin. So this poem, as well as the one before, I already wrote here in Berlin. I think in that sense, you can hear the change from poems that I wrote in Israel. יהודי ערבי בברלין, אני פחות שואל שאלות, יותר מתמסר לג'אז של ברלין, שמגיע מגלויות שונות, בלילה מטפס על חלונות נשים, בבוקר בעבודות פרך, ובשבת עם המילים הקדושות, מדבר לעצמי בעברית, ללא ארץ, מדבר לאחרים באחרות, ללא ארץ, ונעדרתי מהזכרה של אבי, ונזכרתי בו בכל מילה ממילותיי. איני יודע מאיפה באתי ולאן אני הולך, אבל גם לזרות יש רגע הולדת, ואתעורר בזרועות, בגפיים ארוכים, בזיכרונות, כילד. Ein jüdischer Araber in Berlin. Ich stelle weniger Fragen, gebe mich mehr dem Berliner Jazz hin, der aus verschiedenen Diasporen angekommene, steige nachts auf Frauenfenster, Molech morgens, am Schabbat dann mit den eilischen Worten Hebräisch Selbstgespräche, Unerland, anderes Sprechen mit anderen Unerland. Und ich fehlte bei der Gedenkfeier meines Vaters und ich gedachte ihm mit jedem meinen Worte. Woher ich kam, wohin ich gehe, das weiß ich nicht. Doch auch Fremdheit wurde einst geboren, wenn ich einst aufwache, umarmt von langen Gliedmaßen in den Erinnerungen als Kind.
So we've actually already addressed many of the questions we talked about beforehand. What does it mean to be an Arab Jew? I mean, also you added this alongside Judendichte. Like, what is the difference also between these two? Are these kind of addressing the same subjects? Are they not? Is this maybe a development between them?
So actually, this poem was written before. I think the development is the last poem, that the one before, because there I was more focused on in the end of declaring kind of a statement, and this one is more the first year of emigrating to Berlin and the loss. It's more about enjoying going out of the country. Israel is a country that you have ongoing oppression and wars and terror, and then when you come to Berlin and it's kind of open borders and very cosmopolitical. So it was it's more this poem, I think, in a way it's more about I started to understand that this process about losing, I talk to myself Hebrew without a land, and I talk to myself in otherness without a land, that idea that there's no land anymore that goes behind you. And part of this no land is also, for me, religiously disconnecting Judaism from Zionism. And the word, I don't know where I'm come from and where I'm going. It's a word from the Bible. It's saying every man has to know where he comes from and where he's going, and who in the end is standing in front between God. But here in this poem, the God that I praise, it's the Fremdheit. It's being a foreigner. I really liked it in the start. Then it became more melancholic because I was. It takes time to find your own place, your own voice in this new language. When you speak Hebrew, you speak Hebrew to yourself without a land. It's kind of you understand what is minority situation that Deleuze and Guattari talked about Kafka. You understand it well. The idea of being a minor voice, that also the idea that you never can be translated a lot of your memories, For instance, when you sit down with your friends, a lot of what makes you happy that they saw the same TV like you when you were a child, and they had like something togetherness in the memory, and then you are sitting with people who are others. They had different kind of TV, different kind of memories, and so to accept this foreigner was for me a place of birth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that's really struck me throughout this collection of poems, is this tension also between, having a really complicated relationship with Israel. And that's why I also want to come to the poem about Israel, or which is entitled Israel. But on the other hand, the longing that and missing the family, of course, and also in this poem here, you mentioned not being able to travel to your father's memorial ceremony and things like this.
Yeah. I cannot go to my grandmother now. I didn't go to my father's. It's something that always really makes me, even when I could you know, in Israel, I cannot go to Baghdad or to Khaleb or to Mashhad, places where my family came from. And it's not only being Mizrahi, but it's also being an Baghdadi Jew. For instance, when I got married to Charlotte, it was important to me to go to the grave of my father and ask permission and to ask his blessing, you know, and it's a dialogue that I miss. I like, although I have here, I like the Friedhof here, I like to go to the English word.
The graveyard here?
The graveyard here in Azenheide, but it's still, I cannot, there's no big, it's not the same.
Right. So this is probably a good point to, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit and you have to tell me whether you can actually read it at all. If not,
Yeah,
I'll
I
have
can.
to zoom in a
Maybe
little bit
make
more.
it smaller a little bit, because you will read the German, so I have to see the, yeah. So this poem was dedicated to Allen Ginsberg, and just not lately in Israel, they did an anthology dedicated to Allen Ginsberg, and they included that, and it was a great. I was really happy and flattered, and okay, let's do it. ישראל. ישראל, מתי אני אכיר אותך? אני יושב, מחכה ורואה סרטים של מוזיקה מהפכנית. ישראל, מתי תפסיק עם המלחמות שלך? עזבתי את הצבא ואני לא בחור עשיר. ישראל, אני מחפש העבודה, דירה ואהבה ומוות שיבוא, בלי שאכסוס. ישראל, לפעמים אני חושב שאפשר לאהוב אותך רק מרחוק. ישראל, איך זה שאין לך הומור, ואיפה החבאת את הליצניות שלך? ישראל, בגדתי בך עם המזרח וגם עם התיכון. ישראל, אני אוהב להיות זקיף בחומת המין שלך. ישראל, כמה תעשיות וכמה צבא, אולי בכל זאת תתני לי עבודה בשירה. ישראל, אני בעניין של ערביות ומזרחיות, אבל חולם רק עלייך. ישראל, גנבו לי שוב את הארנק ואין לי פצצה גרעינית. יש לי קצת חשיש וכמה שקלים לאוטובוס לבקר את נחום, שבחיים לא נסע מירושלים לתל אביב. ישראל, את תקופה מדי, בואי, תנוחי ותעזבי רגע את האדמה. בואי, אני מחכה בשמי בקל גרביה. ישראל, אני ללא פנסיה, כותב שירים על פנסיה. ישראל, מתי נייצא חדשות שמחות? ישראל, מתי תפסיקי לשנוא את הפערים ביני לבינך? ישראל, אני לא מוכן להתחתן איתך. ישראל, הייתי פעם יהודי ערבי ועכשיו נשאר לי רק שפם לא מסודר. ישראל, אני יודע איך איבדתי עניין בעניין שלך. ישראל, מתי תתענייני בענייני? ישראל, אני רציני באי הרצינות שלי. ישראל, תני לי עוד ג'וינט ובואי נשתוק ביחד. ישראל, מה יקרה אם תחטפי התקף ושאר לבד? את תתני לי לשרוף את גופתך? ישראל, את לא יכולה כל הזמן להתגונן. בואי קצת אליי, בלבנה מלאה של פיוט לילה אלמוני, ונתפלל בריקוד אל השקיעה של הירח הזורך פלוני, ונברך בצניעות גואה את כל האשמורות הלא מוכרות, בבור הציפיות המתגשמות. Und jetzt, Maya, erzählt, liest das Poem, das Gedicht in Deutsch.
Yes, Mette asked me to read this one and the next slightly longer poem. I'll try to pick up your tonality, but I'm not sure I can. Israel. Israel, kapier ich dich? Ich sitze rum und warte, sehe mir Filme über revolutionäre Mucke an. Israel, wann hörst du endlich auf mit deinen Kriegen? Ich habe die Armee verlassen und bin kein reicher Typ. Israel, ich suche Arbeit, Wohnung und Liebe und Tod, der ohne Siechen kommt. Israel, manchmal scheint es, dass ich dich nur aus der Ferne lieben kann. Israel, wieso hast du keinen Humor? Wo versteckst du deine Späße? Israel, ich habe dich betrogen mit dem Nahen und dem Osten. Israel, ich stehe auf deine sexy Mauern mit meinem Ständer. Israel, so viel Armee, so viel Industrie. Vielleicht gibst du mir doch noch Arbeit in der Poesie. Israel, ich mache in Arabisch und Orientalisch, aber träume nur von dir. Israel, schon wieder wurde mein Geldbeutel geklaut und ich habe keine Atombombe, nur ein Klumpen Haschisch und ein paar Schekel für den Autobus, um Nachum zu besuchen. Der ist noch nie von Jerusalem nach Tel Aviv gefahren. Israel, du bist zu steif. Komm, mach dich locker. Lass mal das Land in Ruhe. Komm, ich warte im Himmel. Über Bakr al-Rabi'. Israel, ich krieg keine Rente und schreib Gedichte über Rente. Israel, wann machen wir mal gute Schlagzeilen? Israel, wann hörst du auf, die Kluft zu hassen zwischen dir und mir? Israel, ich bin nicht bereit, dich zu heiraten. Israel, einst war ich arabischer Jude, jetzt bleiben mir nur noch mein zerzauster Schnurrbart. Israel, du weißt, ich hatte keinen Bock mehr auf dein Ding. Israel, wann nimmst du mich endlich mal für voll? Israel, ich meine es ernst mit meiner Ernstlosigkeit. Israel, gib mir noch einen Joint, dann halten wir beide die Klappe. Israel, was wirst du machen, wenn es der Schlag trifft und ich allein zurückbleibe? Erlaubst du mir dann, deine Leiche zu verbrennen? Israel, fühl dich doch nicht immer gleich so angegriffen. Rück näher. Im Vollmond der Nachtliturgik von Unbekannt beten wir tanzend bis zum Untergang des Mondes, der aufgeht, unbenannt. Und wir segnen mit stolzer Bescheidenheit alle namenlosen Nachtwachen in der Gruft sich erfüllender Erwartungen.
Vielen Dank. Toda rabba. Thank you. Shukran.
Afwan, thank you. Wow, it seems to me you are talking to a lot of people here. That's what I asked myself. Who are you talking to in this poem? Is it lots? I mean, yeah. Who are we talking to here?
Back then I was performing a lot with against the war and with workers who strike, and there was a time of Tel Aviv that there was kind of a poetry was really became political. We politicized the poetry, and there was a meeting point between kind of my research about 50s, 60s, and 70s poetry in America, and trying to look for my place and my identity inside of it. So I don't know. It's a lot of things that are happening here, but it's less I mean, there's a lot of meaning, but it's more about. It's a very musical poem. I mean, even when you read it in Deutsch, I think Jan Kuhne, the translator who lives in Jerusalem, actually, you know, he's married and he's an Israeli, lives in Jerusalem. The German translator from Hebrew to German. So he still caught the music, and that's what I tried to do for the first thing in this poem. It's a poem of 8 poems that I can, like the other poems that we read, that are more poems that you can sit and read. But this poem, I always like to take the microphone stand, and it's more like a spoken word, and it's a lot of theater. There's like in every sentence there's kind of there's a director notes how to do it. So it's a poem that try to make people angry in a way, also but to make them laugh and to make them enjoy and to forget that they're angry. But when you think about it, it's a very, very it's rebelling to a lot of places. You know, Bakr al-Rabi', for instance, nobody in the Israeli poetry from the Jewish side write about it. And when they write about it, they always like put it as a victim, you know, and I try to make it into like something that it's just another sky that you want to have it. Or
maybe we should add for the audience that it's a village, a divided village, and say
it's a Palestinian Israeli city, and it's quite, I think it's already a city. I don't think it's a village anymore. And or the instance, for instance, a lot of Israeli, they don't speak. Most of the Israeli don't speak about the nuclear bomb, but for me, it's very something that always I'm frightened from that, and I'm against that. I'm a pacifist in that sense, and we even once thought about doing a reading against it, but we were afraid because this is really makes you, the Shabbat comes to you, and but I read against the nuclear bombs in not next to it, but in places not far away from it in Dimona or Yerucham, and And this is also one thing that Israel doesn't talk about. It's a denial. Nobody spoke of that Israel doesn't have a responsibility for their citizens, and there's so many nuclear bombs and chemical bombs and biological bombs, and so I try to make it not, it's not educational poem, in that sense. It's more like, it's a rebel. It makes you want to hear it. And now when you read it, I thought about it. There's a lot of things to burn the body of Israel. It's something that it's almost like if I read it here and I don't know, Volker from the Grun will read it, he'll say that I'm BDS and anti-Semitic, and that's why we have to, it's like it's the anti-Deutsch will get crazy, and so. But for me, I was free when I wrote this poem. I tried to catch this freedom, and yeah, it's still relevant. I told you just this year they published this anthology for Allen Ginsberg. They included that, and so it's kind of still resonating in the Israeli sphere. And also, you read it now. So.
I mean, since you mentioned it, I was thinking about how to include the whole topic of Israel and Palestine and all the debates, because it's so complicated and, well, if you ask me, tiring in Germany, the way it's being negotiated. But I decided this is somehow something that we should maybe discuss in a different talk or in a different setting in more detail. But I also wanted to mention that there are also some more poems on these subjects in the book. You also have a poem about Gaza, for instance, in there, which I decided not to include today because I wanted to focus more on the migration themes that are in your book. But that's definitely something that comes through very strongly, and that I was very touched by also by reading this. And in this poem, definitely also the duality between, these extreme things you're talking about, the atomic bomb, the occupation. There is so much in here, if only hinted at, and at the same time the normality. When you were reading the Hebrew, I was like, wow, this is like a conversation I'm hearing in the street, alongside with like very serious topics. So yeah, but of course we can only do a short insight. We actually have on this point okay, well, we have one more poem that we wanted to share with you, but I also have someone asking a question. Please. Whether you have what kind of, this is an audience question, whether you have received any backlash about this book, any negative or any strong criticism, and whether you think this kind of personal, because you spoke about how personal your perspective also is, whether that has been weaponized also.
In Germany?
Yeah, also, I guess in Germany, but also, I guess from in Israeli receptions of the book, or from whatever side. I mean,
this book or the book that this poem was also first. Okay, I'll say. In Germany, I didn't get a lot of reviews of this book because there was a problem. This book wasn't sent to reviews to most of the newspapers, so because there was a problem with the PR. But but the people who read the book really liked it, and it even sold a lot of copies and towards like poetry books. So I'm happy, and it was really well received. I was in the Israeli Deutsche Kulturtage, which is they usually bring Israeli authors and German authors, and they brought me from Berlin, so it was got recognition of what we're doing here. And I went to read it in Hamburg and Dresden and Amsterdam, and I was very happy. In Israel, I got a good review in Haaretz, a very good one. They said that it's my mature book, and they really liked it, and I was very happy. And I even was happy that the review was there in Haaretz. But when I wrote this poem specifically, it was published in a book called Why Don't I Write Israeli Love Poems, and this poem, Why Don't I Love Israeli Love Poems, Why Don't I Write Israeli Love Poems, made a lot of noise. People said that that it's a terrorist poem, and that I spit in the education system, there was a lot of anger sometimes in the front of the papers and in the reviews, and sometimes behind it, which is even worse because then it's people who are boycotting you. So I still in Germany, I don't feel it. I don't feel that I'm so recognized, so people will be afraid from that. But I know that it can happen because, for instance, now I'm writing an article with a student from the art school that was there was a storm against they brought a project in the that's called
Museum, right?
the School of Unlearning Zionism, and I just interviewed one of the students, and I write an article about it for Mondoweiss. And I know that it can happen to me also. And in my novel that's going to be published next year in Israel about Berlin, my first novel, I wrote about the storm because of a big prize that Berlin gives to Hebrew publisher, Hebrew literature. So I'm already, this is one of my fears, but I also deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
I just want to add that this poem also, it's a Jewish kind of intertext because Allen Ginsberg is also a Jew in part of his, he says that he is Jew and Buddhist and other things. So it's also kind of answering his poetry. So it's continuation of a Jewish narrative. When I wrote this poem, I didn't imagine that one day I was living outside of Israel. It's a point that I don't write anymore almost, I mean, maybe the last poem on the book, but mostly I think I don't write any poems that talks directly with Israel in that sense that I wrote once. Because once I was more rooted there. Today, my Israelisness is vanishing in a way because I'm not updated. It's like a software without updates. So. And now I'm here. I see the herbs here, the autumn. It's beautiful. I see tatot every week. I know I'm part of the German society, even from the outside. So although I care about them and I care about bringing to feel peace with Palestinians in my time and recognition in the Nakba and right of return.
This is, I mean, I will cut us short a little bit because there's one more topic I want to touch on very quickly, and I was told to stick within 1 hour, and I'm clearly not doing that. So let me say I really want to continue discussions with you on that subject, and I hope we will in a different setting. But let us read out one more. Yes, but let us read out one more final poem because it also links to debates. And before we came live, we spoke about like how do you do activism in a society that you migrated to, what does it mean to be an activist here, and I really wanted to close with this poem which you dedicated to Aylan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Syrian refugee child who drowned in the sea trying to cross and who kind of became the symbol. So
yeah, and again, you will read the German and I will read the Hebrew. So you want me to be first, or maybe you will be first?
Yeah, if you want to go first. Okay. Is it big enough, or should I make it a bit bigger?
No, I can read it. It's okay. I know this one. So, אוקיי. אפילו דרכונים נשברים. מוקדש לאיילן קורדי, הפעוט הסורי בן ה3 שנמצא מת בחוף הים בטורקיה. אפילו סלעים נשברים, אני אומרת לך, ולא מחמת זקנה. שנים רבות הם שוכבים על גבם בחור ובקור. שנים כה רבות. כמעט נוצר רושם של שלווה. דליה רביקוביץ. אפילו דרכונים נשברים, אני כותב לך. גם דרכונים מתבלים על ידי השנים, נוצרים בידי זרים, מחליפים ידיים בגבולות הלא אנושי. אפילו דרכונים משקרים שהם כמו חדשים, כמו חותמת ביומטרית ולא כמו אור, ידיים, עייף, מחוספס וחווה. אפילו דרכונים הופכים לפליטים כשכוכבי החלומות לא מספיקים להגר מבעד לחשכת הטרמינל. אפילו הדרכונים נכלאים כשהחומה הופכת לחתונה, כשהתקווה נשארת רווקה. גם הדרכונים נאבקים לצאת מהאדמה שמתחזה לכרית, רכה, והלב נשאר קשוח וקר, יבשה של לבה קפואה. אפילו דרכונים קמים וממשיכים ללכת לעבודה, וממשיכים ללכת לעבודה, וממשיכים ללכת לעבודה, לכתוב בלי לקרוא על הדרך החוצה מבית הכנסת של המחשבה. גם דרכונים נעצבים כשהם מגלים שנשכחו בין בור גלי ים ענק של זכוכיות שבורות. גם דרכונים הולכים לאיבוד, אל מול בית תפילה שלא עומד ברוחות. את כותבת, לאהבה שלנו אין דרכון, ומחבקת את הסלע שלא יישבר.
Sogar Pässe zerbrechen. Sogar Felsen zerbrechen, sage ich dir, und nicht, weil sie alt sind. Jahrelang liegen sie bei Hitze und Kälte auf ihrem Rücken. So viele Jahre, fast ein Bild von Ruhe. Dalia Ravikovic. Sogar Pässe zerbrechen. Denkt ihr, auch Pässe nutzen sich ab mit den Jahren. Von Fremden geschaffen, wechseln sie die Hand an unmenschlichen Grenzen. Sogar Pässe lügen, sie seien wie neu, biometrische Siegel. Nicht wie die müde Haut der Hand, fleckig, fahl. Sogar Pässe werden Flüchtlinge, wenn Traumsterne nicht ausreichen, um hinter des Terminals Dunkelheit zu gelangen. Sogar Pässe werden eingesperrt, wenn die Mauer Hochzeit feiert und Hoffnung ledig bleibt. Auch Pässe streben danach, der Erde zu entkommen, die vorgibt, ein weiches Kissen zu sein, und das Herz bleibt hart, kalt, die zum Kontinent erstarrte Lava. Sogar Pässe stehen auf und gehen weiter zur Arbeit, schreiben ohne zu lesen auf dem Weg aus der Synagoge der Gedanken. Auch Reisepässe werden traurig, wenn sie entdecken, dass sie in einem riesigen Wellental von Glasscherben vergessen wurden. Auch Pässe gehen verloren, vor dem Gebetshaus, widerstehen keinem Wind. Du schreibst, unsere Liebe hat keinen Pass, und umarmst den Felsen, damit er nicht zerbricht. The first question I asked you beforehand is also, why did you write about passports when we're talking about such a human tragedy? But of course, also we're talking about passports because they're the technical thing, the bureaucratic thing. Why did you center this poem around passports?
Well, you know, the whole question of identity in the modern age, it's the power that identifies us, and it's a symbol of you cannot go from place to place, even you cannot be a refugee or ask for asylum seeker without any papers. You know, you have to have papers, and this way of identifying the other and says who is allowed to enter, who is not allowed to enter, who should be stuck in Moria camp in Lesbos, who is allowed to immigrate to Berlin, and so forth, is a power mechanism of some other of an identity. And for me, the symbol of passport, it's a symbol of something that stops us from being human, that identifies us in order to exclude. And try to open the eyes that, yeah, I live here in the middle of Europe. I have my privilege to enter Berlin and to be an Auslander, but and there's so many people who are dying outside the borders, and they because they were identified as the other, and so excluded from the human right, for the human rights and refugee rights and asylum rights, and I want to not forget them, even though I passed the test, so to say. It's also something I think connected to all what we talked all around my writing, whether I'm Arab Jew in Berlin or whether I'm a Mizrahi in Israel or whether I I I, I try to always bring peace to and show the Palestinians as equal share of Israel and not to identify them as terrorists. And so also in Berlin, this is a task that I got to know through the eyes of activists and through the eyes of reading newspapers here and understand that I cannot just be hedonist and escapist and say, let me go to the Berghain and dance and take drugs and forget about those who stayed outside. It's also a Jewish, it's both universal question and responsibility and accountability, and both the Jewish one, because in Israel, in the Jewish Bible, they say don't forget the ger, the other, because you were once in Egypt a refugee. So there's a ואהבת את הגר, it's to love the refugee. It's a big or the other. It's a big responsibility. It's a big mitzvah. It's a big seal. Something that we have to strive for. And also the meeting with so many Syrian refugees here. You know, I meet here. I went to just long ago. I went to a cafe in Friedrichshain, Riegerstrasse. There's a beautiful restaurant called Aleppo. And you know, he told me the story. He told me I never wanted to be a refugee. I had a shoe factory in Haleb and in Aleppo, and suddenly I found myself in Europe without any rights. And nevertheless, he opened a wonderful restaurant. But the stories you touch their heart, and you cannot just go and just, I don't know, write a poem that makes everybody happy. No, you have to knock the doors of consciousness and soul, open them even from the inside of Europe.
This, I think I will have to stop our conversation here for now. I want to ask you as a last question, also continue from what you just said. I want to ask you whether you want to share a bit more about what you're working on, what topics, what themes are influencing your work at the moment. You said a little bit about your project of Jews and Arabs writing in Berlin.
Yeah, so I'm part of there is a festival in 2 days. There's a reading that will be online with Musa Abdul Kadir and Marta Sela and Kasha Sela. They're doing Uach. They're remapping the whole Uach through the story of immigration, and it's a very. I joined the project as an expert, and I took them to Tempelhof, and which is an airport, and we used the poem in order to fly there in the air. And so you can check this out of the Uach project. And I'm part of a group called Anu Nachna, Jews and Arabs Writing in Berlin, and we're doing a big symposium next month in the 20th of November in the Literarisch Kollegium Wannsee, which will be also broadcast online through the LCB or Berliner Literarische Aktion or Stadtsprachen, and it's about how did the Middle East culture influence the Berlin culture, and how Berlin culture influenced the Middle Eastern culture, and kind of a Middle Eastern union of 14 artists from the Middle East that lives in Berlin, and Jews and Arabs, and they meet and talk and read poetry and talk about it. And also there's a very interesting panel that also talks about you, Maya, because it's Arab Jews meeting German Jews, and going to be very interesting with Esther Dichereit and Anna Shapiro and others. Yeah, what I'm doing, I just published a little booklet called Bleiben or Widerstehen with an article that deals with all the questions we talked about, whether belongs to the German culture, so also if I belong to the German culture, and also about the new literary center in Berlin with new poems and one new broken poem. So this you can also find on my page. And I'm very excited. I have a new novel in January in Israel, and I hope to bring it also to Berlin. I'm kind of in negotiations with publishers here, and a new poetry book. So yeah, it's a time. Although there's a terrible pandemic around us and it freaks me out and others, but still I thanks God and thanks Berlin for having the creativity. And I'm a father, so after the time I'm with my child here in the Spielplatz, so in Neukölln playing. So this is what I actually doing, either writing, being with my child, or being with my partner and enjoying the time with her. I want to thank you, Maya, for this lovely journey in my poems. I mean, your perspective is new for me, and I learned a lot. So thank you for the work and all the readings you did to the poems.
Thank you so much for sharing with that your thoughts, your poetry. For me, it was also a really beautiful experience reading this book, and a great privilege to talk to you. And like I said, I hope we can continue it in a different setting.
And thank you for the Mygration Festival also, which doing so many things. I mean, every day you have different event, and so happy that you went from being physical to being online, because it feels like you have so much energy doing the online. It's inspiring, and those of you watching us, tune to Mygration and check the all event this month. And yeah,
exactly.
And the others who work now.
Thank you. We didn't plan this, by the way. This was spontaneous. But yeah, shameless plug for more migration events coming up. Find us on Instagram, find us on Facebook, Mygration Festival. Next live stream is happening on Saturday evening. Thank you again, Matti, so much. And we'll keep following your work. And yeah, we hope to see you very soon again, also on stage and in real life.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining in. Thank you all for listening.
The ones who watched.
Have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night. Laila Tov. Ma salama.
Ma salam.